Federal Drive is presented by GEHA, Government Employees Health Association, proudly providing health and dental benefits to federal employees and their families. Visit GEHA.com.
And now, the Federal Drive with Terry Gerton, sponsored by GEHA.
Welcome to the Federal Drive on Federal News Network. It's Tuesday, May 26th. I'm your host, Terry Gerton, and I'm glad you're here. Coming up on this hour of the Federal Drive, the federal watchdog system was built to be independent by design. A former inspector general tells us why that design still matters. Plus, existing ethics laws weren't written with prediction markets in mind. Those stories and much more ahead during this hour of the Federal Drive. We begin with this. The General Services Administration's Federal Acquisition Service updated its organizational structure to better reflect how agencies buy and vendors sell. The new setup features 5 new portfolios called Assist, Centralize, Create, Deliver, and Optimize. Each is bringing together sometimes disparate services and moving FAS out of its previous organizational structure that's centered on category management. For more on what drove this reorganization, Federal News Network's executive editor, Jason Miller, caught up with Laura Stanton, the acting commissioner of GSA's FAS.
I think there were probably several different catalysts for it. Let's just start. I don't have the exact business volume numbers from 10 years ago, but let's just say 50 billion is what FAS was doing at that point. Last year, we were over 115 billion. So we've more than doubled in our business volume size in the last 10 years. So that certainly was part of it. We also had become much more mature in the category management side of things. And we were realizing that we were missing some real opportunities for alignment, particularly when it came to business process functions, IT systems. And also we listened to a lot of to the feedback that industry had been giving us. They had made it really clear that our multiple awards schedule program at that point in the legacy FAS was spread across 4 different portfolios. And while it was a single program, companies that were working across those different portfolios were experiencing basically inconsistent service and sometimes differing interpretations of things. And we saw an opportunity to really pull the multiple awards schedule program together to create better consistency, better stakeholder engagement from the industry side, and also a better customer experience for the agencies. And we realized that we also wanted to align around the acquisition lifecycle. So that is sort of, if you think about the Office of Acquisition Solutions Development being the beginning of that lifecycle, then moving into either the task order work that's being led by OCAS or by the Assisted Acquisition Service, or driving into those shared services, you can really see how ASD creates that foundation for the other parts of FAS to deliver the best services possible. And the Assisted Acquisition Service, over 90%, 95% of their work is delivered using GSA contracts. So there is very much of an interdependent nature of these portfolios that we wanted to be able to emphasize. And this was around creating this organization that's going to be able to prepare us for the future of federal acquisition. As GSA's role has changed in the last year and a half, we wanted an organization that could quickly adapt to that. So it's all of those things. Was an opportunity to build on what we had done in eliminating the regional structure about 2.5 years ago, and take it to the portfolios that had been less impacted at that point, and really optimize across the entire FAS business.
One of the things that stands out to me as you have talked about this over the last couple of weeks is the impact seems really a lot internally. The outside folks, whether it's industry or your customer agencies, may not really see a big difference. If they want to find a GWAC, they find it. It's probably in the same place. It's the same website works, right? If an industry wants to apply for the schedules, get on the schedules, or figure out how to the on-ramp for Oasis Plus, that all works together. Is that how you're kind of viewing this? This is really about making GSA, we'll use the maybe a little bit tired terms of efficient and effective versus the impact outside of GSA?
I would say it definitely was designed so that we could work better internally. Ultimately, that is going to filter into changes on the customer experience side. I think it could be that those changes actually are felt sooner on the industry side, as they now have a single portfolio to support all of their multiple awards schedule, all of that's under a single management chain. So I think that industry could end up feeling these effects much earlier than the agencies. But the goal is that first, we don't disrupt anything that we're doing. That's always just a given. The agencies need to be able to get what they need. Industry needs to be able to reach the federal market through the GSA schedules, through the GSA contracts. So step one, don't disrupt. So step two, make it better. That's basically the way that we're thinking about it. And this puts us into a position to be able to make things better more easily.
Reorgs, you get it on paper, it's pretty, you shuffle shares around, everyone goes, okay, now Larry Hale, you're here, Jeff Lau, you're there. What's the next step? Like, how do you really kind of take the reorg from a piece of paper or a vision into reality? Are there things you need to do over the next, we'll say 3, 6, 9 months?
Oh, absolutely. So this was the beginning. There is each of the ACs, they picked up new programs. So the assistant commissioners, so Larry, Jeff, Pete, Mark, all picked up new work. What they're doing is deep dives, and they're building their teams together and doing all of the things that you need to do on the change management side. So very much right now, they're learning about the new programs that they've taken, that they are now in their new organizations, getting a sense about how do they bring people who are working on, say, the multiple awards schedule, how do they bring all of those people, all of the different divisions, the management, the employees together to deliver more consistently, understanding where their best practices were across the organization and how do we spread those more easily to the programs that might not have fully adopted those earlier. So, and then we begin looking at how do we simplify? Where can we take friction out of the process? Where can we reduce that administrative burden? This is also going to have a big impact on our internal systems development, because now instead of I'm getting really into the sausage making on this, but for example, going back to the multiple awards schedule, we need to modernize those IT systems. We've been doing it for catalog. That all sits within the acquisition solutions development portfolio. So you now have the IT systems, the business processes, and the business owners all in the same vertical. That has a huge opportunity to streamline the requirements development, the user testing, and the delivery of new functionality. So that's a huge effort, and that's going to pay off as we're also looking at our procurement acquisition ecosystem program that we need to launch and that you're going to be seeing more of as we go throughout the summer.
Laura Stanton is the Acting Commissioner of the Federal Acquisition Service at the General Services Administration, speaking there with Federal News Network's Executive Editor, Jason Miller. You can find his story at federalnewsnetwork.com. Up next, the federal watchdog system was built to be independent by design. A former Inspector General tells us why that design still matters. This is the Federal Drive with Terry Gerton on Federal News Network.
Tune in Tuesdays at 10:30 a.m. and 2:30 p.m. for the Innovation in Government Show, sponsored by Carasoft. Hear from the industry leaders advancing the technologies shaping how agencies modernize secure operations and deliver better services. Innovation in Government covers what is changing now, what is working from cybersecurity and cloud to data, AI, and emerging technologies. Listen to Innovation in Government, Tuesdays at 10:30 a.m. and 2:30 p.m. on Federal News Network. Search Innovation in Government.
Welcome back to the Federal Drive with Terry Gerton on Federal News Network. The Inspector General system has weathered political pressure before, but this moment is testing how durable it really is. Even so, the day-to-day work of audits, investigations, and accountability continues. Former FDIC Inspector General Jay Lerner is here with a perspective from inside the system. Jay, thanks so much for joining me today. It's great to have you on the show.
Great. Thank you, Terry, and happy to be here.
There is a new book out about IGs and their duty, authority, and integrity. You wrote the chapter on the history and evolution of the IG community. From where we sit today, what do you think people most misunderstand about the role of IGs?
Well, I think it's important to understand how IGs first came about, a little bit of the history, and that's why I wrote the chapter. If you take a step back to the 1970s, in the post-Watergate era, 1972 was the break-in, and President Nixon resigned in 1974. And there were a number of legislative reforms after that in the late 70s. One of them was the Inspector General Act, which created these internal watchdogs at the different agencies. It started with 12 IGs and has now expanded to over 70 IGs over time. It really wasn't a new concept. It had dated back to the American Revolution or even before that. But it was an opportunity to establish independent watchdogs within the agency and having audits and evaluations of programs combined with investigations all under one roof. And it was really a unique sort of creation to speak truth to power, if you will, and to be able to delve deeply within an agency and to make findings and recommendations about how to improve the operations of that agency. And then over time, it's developed over the past 45 or 50 years, and it's gone through a various evolution during that time.
Do you think that agencies and the people that they support appreciate the value of the IG?
I think it's once been characterized as the most important public servant that you've never heard of. And I think it's still something that I'm educating my family on, what an IG does. My nieces and nephews think it stands for Instagram, but it's really for Inspector General. And I think you're right. It is somewhat underappreciated in terms of the value that oversight can bring to an agency and to government operations as a whole.
Well, nobody wants the bad news to get out, and oftentimes that's what's associated with the IG, right?
I think that's right. That's some of the association, but frankly, in my mind, an IG should call it like they see it, whether it's bad or good, and to be honest about and candid about it. And I think that builds the credibility and trust in the position, in the institution of an Inspector General and in oversight as a whole.
This administration started with a pretty adversarial take on the IG community. They fired 17 of them very quickly. There have been continuing legal fights about that, sustained pressure on all of the institutions that support oversight. I know you're not currently in it today, but you're close to it. What's your sense of the morale in the IG community today?
Well, as you mentioned, I retired in 2023, so I've been out for a little bit. I now teach a course at George Washington University on oversight and accountability. And the way I've sort of structured that course, being a lawyer, is along the lines of the Constitution, the first three articles of the Constitution, which includes the legislative branch, the executive branch, and the judiciary branch. And they all have important roles in the checks and balances within the government, really checking the executive powers. If you think of the legislative branch, they have the standing committees, appropriations, the Government Accountability Office, even things like the Congressional Budget Office or the Congressional Research Service. Within the executive branch is where the IGs fit in. And there's also whistleblowers within the executive branch. There's the Office of Special Counsel, which protects whistleblowers, the Office of Government Ethics, looking at ethics issues, and then, of course, the judiciary, the courts and lawyers as well. And I add even a fourth branch, the fourth estate, if you will, the press and the media, as investigative journalists and think tanks and non-governmental organizations provide very important oversight of the executive branch. I think 2025, frankly, was a pretty tough year for oversight as a whole. And there were, I would say, a diminishment of oversight during that time in looking at each of those four elements, the three branches of government and the fourth estate. As a result, I think there is a lower sense of morale, at least anecdotally. That's what I hear. And I think staffing has gone down. I think there's been a lot of people that have left the oversight community. And I do think that has had an effect on morale. The folks that stick around, still working hard and still doing their job and plugging away and doing the right things. And so I'm hopeful that that can rebound and bounce back and that people will be proud of the Inspector General community and oversight as a whole.
Jay Lerner is the former Inspector General for the Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation. Jay, in addition to being adversarial towards the IG and oversight community, this administration has put a lot of emphasis on attacking waste, fraud, and abuse in government programs. How do you thread those two things together?
Well, the president has established a new task force on fraud, and I think that can be helpful. The Department of Justice previously had a fraud section, which I was a part of years ago, and there was a lot of fraud enforcement. As a prosecutor, that's where I was. There's was an emphasis in the investigative community as well. And we'll have to see how that plays out. It could be used in a political sense, the new task force. And I think some people are very concerned about that as an aspect of it, but we'll have to see what the future holds in that regard. I was proud of the work that the Department of Justice had previously done with respect to fraud enforcement and prevention and investigations as well.
Let's talk about the SIGI Council as part of this ecosystem. It's been described as kind of the connective tissue for those 70 IGs that you mentioned earlier. But OMB has tried to defund it, to stand down its websites. There's been, again, kind of ongoing legal contention about how that should operate. What is SIGI? Why is it so important to this community? And what's its current status?
Sure. SIGI was created, and that was the acronym for Council of Inspectors General on Integrity and Efficiency. It's the 70-plus IGs that you had mentioned. It was created in 2008 and actually started in 2009. And it really is that connective tissue, if you will, representing the IG community as a whole. Each IG has jurisdiction over their individual agencies, but it's a way to bring the lessons learned and best practices throughout the community and to be able to do cross-cutting or joint projects across agency lines on topic areas. So, for example, one of the areas was the pandemic relief, which was $5 trillion going out the door of our taxpayer money for economic relief and healthcare and medical care. And the Pandemic Response Accountability Committee was created as a committee within SIGI to look at those cross-cutting issues across agencies. And there's about 20 inspectors general that participate in the PAC, the Pandemic Response Accountability Committee. I was one of them, and it was an opportunity to bring that collective knowledge together, and I think really has succeeded quite a bit. SIGI also does a lot of training so that there's consistency among the quality of personnel within the IG community. They handle the Integrity Committee, which is a self-policing organization where there are allegations of misconduct. It does peer reviews to make sure those quality standards are met for audits, evaluations, inspections, and investigations as well. So SIGI serves a lot of functions to bring the community together and has really done great work over that time.
You also mentioned the PRAC, and it looks like the PRAC has got a new lease on life. They're going to be extended to watch over the expenditures from the One Big Beautiful Bill Act. What do you think that they'll be finding there?
It's hard to know, but anytime the government gives out money, and it's always ripe for fraud areas. And I think one of the things that the PRAC did that the subsequent joint efforts can benefit from is they created these blueprints of how to submit government programs and how to implement them so that there is a reduction in fraud or that can be deterred or mitigated or prevented in the first place. And so I think that's where the PRAC can really be beneficial of how government programs operate in the future. As you said, SIGI has had some funding issues, and OMB has cut that back in October, reinstated the funding in November, about 6 weeks after that happened. And now it's on a sort of a quarterly basis that SIGI gets funded. And so we'll have to see once again what the future holds. I hope that will continue. As I mentioned, I think SIGI and the PRAC have done some impressive work over time.
We started our conversation today talking about the history of the IG community, and then we talked about current events. Let's talk about the future. From where you sit and from where you're watching and from what you're teaching, what does the future of the oversight community look like to you right now?
Well, I think it faces some challenges, and we've identified a few already in terms of funding for SIGI. I think another challenge that it currently faces is the vacancies. 28 IG offices are vacant right now. 7 are designated federal entities. The other 21 are presidentially appointed, Senate confirmed IGs. But 28 out of the 72 is about 40%. There's 2 nominees for those positions, and, it'd be good to fill the vacancies. some of those vacancies have been around for quite a long time, some over 200 days and some up to 2,500 days, almost 7 years. It's important to fill those vacancies. I think that's a real challenge for the IG community, as well as the new leaders. Many of the new IGs, there were 8 that were confirmed in 2025. They're new leaders, and so some of them do not have much experience in the IG community or in the oversight community. In addition, there's new leadership within SIGI, and there's lower level employees within the IG offices got bumped up to supervisory or management positions. And so all of that creates a bit of an atmosphere of uncertainty in terms of some inexperience and loss of the institutional knowledge. You mentioned many IGs were fired, and I think it represented something on the order of about 350 years of institutional experience. And so it's hard to replace that, and I think that will be a challenge for the community going forward.
Are you worried about growing political influence over the function of the IG and whether or not the IGs can operate in an independent, objective space?
I think it's a concern that everyone should have in their mind. There's been a lot written about it. I would say it's a little early to make any judgments about that, but I think it's something to watch as we go forward. Once again, because of some of the inexperience, some of the comments that have been made, the way the IGs were fired, I think that all raises the risk level and a concern that we should be cognizant. Independence is so critical to an inspector general. I learned that as when I was at the Department of Justice Inspector General's office as Chief of Staff and at the FDIC, to make sure that you can call it like you see it, and whether that's good or bad, and without fear or favor. And it's important to have that independence in any oversight, and particularly for inspectors general.
Jay Lerner is the former Inspector General for the Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation. Jay, thanks so much for sharing your insights with us today.
Thank you for having me, Terry.
We'll post this interview at federalnewsnetwork.com/Federal Drive. Subscribe to the Federal Drive wherever you get your podcasts. Still to come, a week that didn't end the way Congress planned. But first, existing ethics laws weren't written with prediction markets in mind. Want to recognize a federal employee or military service member for their critical work in supporting the country? Send them an e-card today. Visit federalnewsnetwork.com and search May We Say Thank You. You're listening to the Federal Drive with Terry Gerton on Federal News Network. Welcome back to the Federal Drive with Terry Gerton on Federal News Network. Political prediction markets allow traders to profit from future events tied to public decision-making. But as oversight systems come under strain, Pogo says that structure creates risks current ethics laws were not designed to address. Janice Luong, a policy analyst at the Project on Government Oversight, walks us through how those markets work and where the guardrails fall short. Janice, welcome back to the show. It's great to have you.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
Let's talk about prediction markets. You've got some new analysis out that looks at the growth of prediction markets, especially those tied to political and national security events. What has Pogo been looking at that really made you say this is now an urgent oversight concern?
So Pogo is no stranger to addressing congressional insider trading. We have a long history of addressing this issue. So when we first heard about these suspicious trades on these prediction markets, specifically referring to the contract that wagered the ousting of Venezuela's president, Nicolas Maduro, that was pretty much our first signal to track this issue. Now, we recently found out that a U.S. soldier was recently charged for betting about $30,000 on Polymarket and allegedly securing a profit of approximately $409,000 from it. So we're tracking this development as the case develops, but we are also tracking other developments, and there has been many, such as campaign staffers recently telling NPR that they profited off betting their own candidates using their own polling data. And some have also admitted that it was common to bet and profit using insider information. Now, I think the developments on prediction markets have been rapidly growing, and honestly, I have not heard of such a stark example of people coming out and admitting that there is insider trading happening. So this is definitely on our radar, and POGO is tracking multiple developments at the moment.
For people who might be less familiar, walk us through how these markets operate, particularly how event contracts on platforms like Polymarket or Kalshi are structured, but also how they're supposed to be regulated.
Sure. So on the top line, prediction markets are online platforms where a participant can sell or buy contracts called event contracts. And typically these event contracts have binary outcomes where you get to wager on future events. So on these platforms, the contract would present a question, a yes or no question. For example, one that is active at the moment: will Congress pass the SAVE Act? And you can bet either yes or no, and then you get a payout when you correctly bet on the outcome. And the price of these contracts typically are valued between a cent and $1, with the value of the contract reflecting the probability of the event occurring. And to your question of what is the right way to regulate these markets, that's the $1 million question we are trying to resolve, right? But right now we are seeing an enforcement problem. So right now there are rules that exist. It looks good on paper, but rules can look great, but when there's no enforcement, it's pretty much deemed ineffective. Now, right now, how regulatory enforcement looks like is that Congress has deferred authority to the CFTC to oversee these prediction markets. And then the commission sometimes review these contracts sporadically in limited circumstances. But the CFTC also relies on these prediction platforms to oversee whether they're complying with regulations or not. So really, the first line of defense in terms of regulatory compliance are from these platforms. And this is where the self-policing comes in. And right now, we are clearly seeing this process fall through the cracks because we are seeing event contracts that are clearly prohibited under current regulations being on these prediction markets. Now, and to be clear, there is a clear ban on event contracts that relate to or refer to terrorism, war, assassination, unlawful activity, and those that are contrary to the public interest. As we can see, there are contracts that are related to war that are actively being traded. So clearly something is amiss, and that is where I think Congress and the CFTC can come in.
Janice Long is a policy analyst at the Project on Government Oversight. Janice, as you're describing this really complex environment, it strikes me that we might have just a very basic definitional problem, right? Is this betting? Is it information sharing? Is it hedging like you would in a commodities market where you think the price is going to go up, so you buy contracts that hedge that? What is this really? The founders of these markets say that they're just information sharing, public square sorts of things.
So describing these prediction markets as betting contributes to the larger discourse, right? Because when you refer these prediction markets to betting, then we are going into the gambling territory of things, which is currently being litigated. Now, I would assert that when you are participating on these prediction markets, you are betting on something. You are betting on the event contracts you are actually betting on an event that will actually occur or not occur. Now, the assertion that these prediction markets is information sharing, technically not wrong. Someone can just bet on an event contract based on what someone else told them, and technically true. However, the problem is that information sharing occurring within the government and to people who are privy to non-public information. That is really the crux of the issue, is that it is really hard to determine, it's really hard to prove insider trading in the government. And so when it is occurring within the federal government or with public officials, it's difficult to hold them accountable. And that is really the issue here. As for hedging, it's really a big question mark, the economic functions of these markets, because as we see in certain trades, one can argue that highly profitable event contracts are being placed without hedges. For example, traders have betted $500 million on the price of crude oil only 15 minutes before U.S. President Donald Trump announced a 5-day delay to attack Iran's energy infrastructure, and that sent the market plunging. These represent participants placing large bets without a hedge. Another more practical example is, say, like, if there is an event contract, you can bet on anything. So if there's an event contract that bets on, like, oh, what color Gatorade will this athlete be dumped with? Now, it's hard to argue that there is an economic function in participating in these kinds of event contracts. And what is the real hedge here? So that is that also contributes to the conversation of why these trades are raising concerns, because when you start seeing traders betting large amounts of money without hedging something, it almost gives the impression that they're almost certain that their bet is the correct one.
Janice, we already have conflict of interest and ethics laws for federal officials that don't seem to be applicable here, or at least enforceable, as you mentioned. Pogo recommends several actions that Congress could take now to prevent corruption. What's on your list?
Sure. So that is correct that there are existing laws in place that basically make insider trading illegal. Government officials are prohibited from participating in any matter in which they have a personal direct or indirect financial interest. However, it's not comprehensive. Under Title 18, there are certain conflict of interest statutes that do not apply to the president and vice president. And this is a weakness in the law, because what prediction markets reform demands is a prohibition across all three branches. So this is the gap that Congress can seek to fill. Some solutions that Congress can take is to ban federal officials across all three branches and government employees from trading on these prediction markets. Now, recently, the Senate has passed a resolution that basically bans the Senate from trading on these prediction markets. However, it is a Senate rule, and that means it doesn't apply to anyone beyond the Senate. The House recently introduced a resolution that mirrors the same prohibition as the Senate. This is a great first step for both chambers. However, we need comprehensive laws that clearly address this issues, because opacity is the enemy to oversight and accountability. So solutions that Congress can take are to codify the prohibition of federal officials across all three branches and government employees from trading on these prediction markets during their tenure, as well as prohibit dependents and spouses of covered individuals from engaging in any financial transaction through prediction markets for the duration that the covered individuals are employed within the government. The Congress can also pass clearer statutes that direct the CFTC on what event contracts are prohibited and what isn't. Currently, the Commodity Exchange Act gives discretionary authority to the CFTC to review what event contracts fall under the prohibited categories. However, it would be clear for Congress to pass a clear prohibition provision that states that event contracts related to or refer to war, assassination, terrorism, illegal activity, and those contrary to the public interest as the event contracts that are prohibited. They should also expand the contract prohibition to death, government and military actions, and electoral outcomes, especially during a midterm year. I expect there to be much a lot of activities on these prediction market platforms. And the concern here is really that these prediction markets create a financial incentive that would eventually shape how lawmakers make decisions in Congress. And it really shouldn't be that way. Congress should prioritize the well-being of the public rather than seeking to gain a profit from these prediction markets. And one last important thing is to implement meaningful penalties, such as disgorgement clause, significant fines, and removal from office. And currently there are certain legislation that has been introduced that addresses this.
Janice Luong is a policy analyst at the Project on Government Oversight. Janice, thanks for walking us through this.
Thank you very much.
We'll post this interview along with a link to the Pogo paper at federalnewsnetwork.com/Federal Drive. Hear the Federal Drive on demand. Subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. Coming up next, a week that didn't end the way Congress planned. This is the Federal Drive with Terry Gerton on Federal News Network. Welcome back to the Federal Drive with Terry Gerton on Federal News Network. Both congressional chambers were lining up for votes, then packed up and left town early. From sudden funding fights to shifting priorities, it turned into a week of surprises on Capitol Hill. Joining me to walk through what happened and what comes next is Lauren Duggan, Deputy News Director for Bloomberg Government. Lauren, great to have you on. Thanks for joining me.
Thanks for having me.
Let's talk about last week on the Hill. Everybody was ramping up toward the end of the week for the vote-a-rama in the Senate and big votes on packages. And we turned around Thursday afternoon and they closed shop and left town. What happened?
Well, a lot went into the pause button being hit on Reconciliation 2.0, as it's been known. And that's the bill that was primarily meant to fund Immigration and Customs Enforcement and the Border Patrol after that was taken out of the annual spending bill. And they decided to move that funding for several years as part of a reconciliation bill. But complications arose because of the potential funding around the ballroom and areas around it for the Secret Service. And then the weaponization or anti-weaponization fund that had been announced earlier in the week as a result of the IRS lawsuit that the president had filed. So all those factors kind of converge to make them hit the pause button on that until after they get back from their recess around Memorial Day.
Let's just break a couple of those things down for people who don't live in these particular headlines. Let's talk about the ballroom. We've heard about $1 billion for the ballroom that's really supposed to support the Secret Service and security requirements. That got ruled out. Walk us through that.
Yeah, so the original version of the bill that was released by the Senate Judiciary Committee had $1 billion for the Secret Service for security arrangements around this East Wing project. So that wouldn't necessarily be the ballroom, as it were. That was supposed to come from private funds, but for needs around that and perhaps things underneath the ballroom around it, fencing. The Secret Service director had gone up to Capitol Hill and provided more information saying they needed maybe $220 million, something like that for parts of it, but that, they could use some money for other expenses. But that got questioned, and that was part of what's known as the bird bath process, where they look at language and figure out if it complies with the rules of reconciliation. And it was running into some trouble there, and they were trying to work through how to either take that out of the bill, keep it in, but it was creating some political headaches for them too, because Democrats were going to offer amendments around that. Not all the Republicans were on board. So that was a tricky thing for them to navigate.
The other big piece of this is the anti-weaponization fund, almost $2 billion there. What's all the angst around that?
So this was the result of President Trump suing the IRS for the release of his information, and the DOJ was part of the representation there. And instead of that case working through court, there was a settlement reached to create this fund for $1.776 billion that people could apply to if they felt that they had a case that steps were taken against them during primarily the Biden era. So that fund was kind of a deal between two parts of the government that are connected to the president, and that was raising concern with some people. It's funded out of something called the Judgment Fund, which has a permanent appropriation. So it's not like Congress had to put money into this. And as the details of this were being digested on Capitol Hill, people had a lot of questions. Todd Blanche, the acting attorney general, came up, tried to answer some questions, wasn't mollifying them completely. And that a part of the reason this couldn't get done is they were trying to figure out what sort of language could be added to this, or if the language could maybe be added in a way by Democrats that some Republicans didn't like, because this was a bipartisan concern. There were Republicans who had real questions about this fund, its structure, how they could oversee it, what information they would get.
So those two things really hit the pause button on Reconciliation 2.0. There was another really important pause button that got hit in the House regarding a war powers vote. Those have been coming up regularly, but this one seemed to feel a little bit different.
This one did feel different. 2 weeks ago, there was the tie vote. And then this vote, maybe people thought, okay, the president's back from his trip to China, maybe with a makeup of people who are in the House that week, it could go forward. On Thursday afternoon, they were about to take that vote, and it was announced that they would not be holding that vote before they left for recess. Some people concluded maybe they were afraid they were going to lose it on the Republican side, and that there would be enough votes there to say, no, we don't think this war should continue. We had seen a Senate vote as well. It was a procedural vote, but a majority of the Senate did on that vote to move forward with the debate on whether or not to hit pause on the war. So that would have been back-to-back votes, not looking favorably to the president's position on the war. So we'll see if they take that vote in the House when they come back. Democrats may continue to try to force these votes, force these debates, because they want to keep hitting at this policy decision in Iran that they don't like.
Lauren Duggan is Deputy News Director for Bloomberg Government. So, Lauren, this is all going to hang on the edge of the precipice for another week or so while they're on recess. What's going to happen when they get back?
Well, Marco Rubio will be on the Hill, the Secretary of State. I'm sure he'll be asked questions about that. And they are going to be joining the defense debates here pretty soon. Authorization, appropriations has to come up, and Iran's going to hang over that. Supplemental funding, what are they going to do with that? So lots of questions about how Congress will continue to deal with the authorization questions, but then funding, which it's hard to fund the Defense Department unless you take into account how you deal with the war funding.
Well, there are a lot of other bills that are on the table, many with deadlines. The surface transportation bill's got a deadline coming up, and there was some negotiation around that this week.
Yeah, September 30th is the expiration of the last one, the 2021 infrastructure law, which included this surface transportation bill. The House Transportation and Infrastructure Committee released its bill a Sunday ago, and then had a markup that went pretty late into the night on Thursday, where they got their major section done. We also saw the Science Committee in the House weigh in, and then the Energy and Commerce Committee with portions that they want. So those are big elements of that bill that they'd like to move forward with on the House floor, make a marker with the Senate. Senate hasn't really done much yet, but a lot of questions remain to be answered. It's a tall order to get that done, but they're trying to make some progress on a bipartisan basis, by the way, to get that legislation written and make some progress on that before September 30th, if not before the end of the year. But it's a lot of bill to work their way through.
And there's a sneaky little provision in there that would put us all on permanent daylight savings time.
That is part of the Energy and Commerce bill, yeah. And the president, I think, endorsed that as well. So we'll see if that makes it through.
There's other personnel news. Talk to us about the insights from last week's primaries.
Yeah, on the primary front, you had Bill Cassidy, the senator from Louisiana, come in third in his primary, not make the runoff. So he'll be a lame duck for the rest of this year. You had Thomas Massie, a Republican congressman from Kentucky, who the president had opposed and backed his opponent. He also lost his primary. And then you had the president give his endorsement finally in the Texas Republican Senate primary for Ken Paxton, the current state attorney general, rather than the incumbent John Cornyn. So what we know so far is the two who lost are, that's where a loyalty test was applied, and the other candidate won in that case. So we'll see what happens in Texas Tuesday night, and then, what that means for the rest of the year. But we already saw Cassidy be one of the votes to move forward with the Iran war debate. So, once you're out and you're done, you might vote a little differently.
Right. And with the margins as close as they are, having 2 or 3 or 4 maybe in this category could really swing some votes.
Absolutely. Some of these votes are tight, and, these party line bills on reconciliation, it only takes 3 or 4 votes to cause real trouble on individual amendments or the package itself.
Let's talk about some more surprises from last week. The president was all set to sign his executive order on artificial intelligence, and then, poof, that came off the calendar. What happened there?
Yeah, it sounds like he didn't like some of the things that were in it, and that could be from people who he was talking to ahead of time. As we understand it, they had said they were going to do it and then started inviting people to have this big ceremony, and then he announced he wasn't going to do it. So I don't know if that's a cancellation for good or they're going to try and rewrite it and tweak some things. But that was, nothing's final until it's final, and that's a good case of one of those things where it just hasn't hit the finish line quite yet.
But for something that got so close to the finish line around really important tech topics, do you read anything into that in terms of efforts on the Hill to move some of the controversial tech bills? Is it going to be possible to get agreement?
Perhaps. I mean, we saw some crypto movement with the Senate Banking Committee reporting something out. That's something that the industry is so actively engaged in. And if they can come to agreement there, they will. Although, again, time is going to be a problem there. On bigger AI questions and regulation, there do seem to be some divisions there. We're waiting for more bills. The House GOP team working on that. We'll see if they get something together here in the coming weeks and months. But it's going to be tough to get those things done with so many weeks, so many few weeks remaining here.
One last bit of surprise news came on Friday afternoon when Tulsi Gabbard resigned as the DNI. There wasn't a lot of anticipation around that other than general talk. What do you think that means in terms of confirmation calendars and replacements?
Well, that's an interesting one. We've seen a few departures, only one of which has been replaced. Homeland Security, Kristi Noem was replaced by Mark Wayne Mullen, who was a senator, got confirmed. But we still have vacancies at the Justice Department, where there's an acting attorney general, and also at the Labor Department, where the deputy is serving as secretary there. And now we're going to have this one. We'll see if these are positions that can be filled. They could be tough. Again, that they only have 53 seats, departures from that. And if you don't get any Democratic crossovers, going to be hard to confirm some of these jobs. So we'll see how long they stick in acting roles, and what that, depending on what happens in the midterms going into the next 2 years, could be even more difficult if Republicans lose seats or lose control overall. So that's definitely math that's got to be in the White House's mind as they see these departures. Well,
here's a week of recess coming up, so hopefully things are a little calmer and we'll catch up the next time.
Sounds great.
That's Lauren Duggan, Deputy News Director for Bloomberg Government. We'll post this interview at federalnewsnetwork.com/Federal Drive. Subscribe to the Federal Drive wherever you get your podcasts. The Department of Health and Human Services is shrinking cash awards for its top performers. In its place, the department is shifting a majority of its bonus budget to cover special act awards with eligibility criteria that are less well-defined. This is all part of a government-wide push to limit the number of top scores federal employees get on their annual performance reviews. Federal News Network's Jory Heckman is here with more. Jory, thanks for joining me.
Hey, Terry. Great to be here.
How exactly is HHS changing its performance awards here?
Yeah, so what HHS is doing is they are splitting up the pot of money that they have reserved for these kinds of performance awards and how they've handled those in the past. Previously, all of their awards and bonuses, about 80% of those went to performance awards. So if you scored a 5 out of 5, you got a certain amount of money. If you got a 4 out of 5, you got a certain amount of money. And that was pretty well known as to what you were going to get based on what score you were receiving. And things are changing a little bit. HHS is splitting up that pot of money 40% as opposed to 80% in the past. That 40% will now go toward performance awards, and the remaining 60% that will go to incentive awards. They go by many names. They also go by special act awards or on the spot awards. And the criteria for that is a little less clear. That's really at the discretion of agency leadership, agency management, to award those bonuses, those financial incentives. And they're really at the discretion of that agency leadership.
What's driving the changes in this practice?
Well, what we heard from HHS, from a spokesperson there, is that HHS is trying to standardize how awards funding is distributed across the department. And more broadly, this is part of the Trump administration, through its Office of Personnel Management, to ensure that there is consistency in how federal employees are rated and how they are rewarded through those performance ratings. What we've seen recently is that OPM has told agencies for next budget cycle, not the one we're currently in, to be more stringent with who gets these top ratings, that 4s and 5s and 3s will be more stringently watched, and that there will be a forced distribution on how many of those top scores can be awarded. Essentially, there'll be a finite number of those top scores, and you can't really give them to everyone, even if managers believe they are top performers.
Are you hearing from employees on their thoughts about this change?
Yeah, employees are certainly concerned by all of this. It's been a rocky year for HHS. What we've seen recently is that they are going on a round 2 of reductions in force that are more targeted, but this is after the HHS sent layoff notices to about 10,000 employees last year. And in other cases, HHS has been cracking down on reasonable accommodations, especially those that pertain to telework. So employees that I've spoken to have said that this is just kind of the latest hit to morale, that this is happening fairly late in the performance evaluation cycle, and that they were told one thing just months ago, that they were going to get much more generous performance awards, and now they're being told that they are shrinking. To give you an example here, I spoke to employees at the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. They were told in late March that if they got a 5 out of 5, if they got an outstanding evaluation, they were on track to get a 4% bonus, equivalent to 4% of their base pay. And what they've been told now is that those same people, those outstanding performance receivers, they're going to get somewhere in the neighborhood of 2.5%. And that's the biggest hit. Actually, the top performers are seeing the biggest shrink in what they're going to get as far as performance awards. People who get 4s and 3s, they're getting a more modest cut.
Jory, how does this approach to bonus payments square, I guess, with the administration's philosophy around performance management? If you want folks to have sustained excellent performance, doesn't it make sense to offer them a bonus for that kind of work?
Yeah, I would say that the Trump administration has made it pretty clear that as they retool some of this, they are of the opinion that there has been a little bit of great inflation, that it was just too easy to get a 5 or 4 in these performance evaluations in the past, that there needs to be a more stringent criteria for those 4s and 5s, that essentially need to have a stricter standard for those. And so that's something we're going to see play out in the coming years here, but this is happening fairly late in the process for this year. These are changes that HHS is rolling out quickly, didn't socialize to very many people. And even by OPM's standards, this seems to be not on the level with what they have recommended. We saw guidance from OPM Director Scott Cooper last summer. He said that performance awards should make up about 60% of the bonus pot for every agency. And by the numbers here, HHS is not doing that. They have shrunk that down to 40%, cut that money in half compared to what we've seen in prior years. For what it's worth, I did reach out to an OPM spokesperson about that, and she said that at the end of the day, OPM's guidance is just that. It's guidance, and that agencies have the final word on what they choose to implement.
How are you seeing this play out in other agencies across the government?
Well, at other agencies, we've seen things kind of subjectively play out. It was only a couple of weeks ago that we saw the State Department tell employees, again, fairly late in the process, that they may have received one grade from their immediate supervisor, but State Department leadership said, actually go back and lower those scores. These were too generous of a scores, going back to this theme that there is grade inflation. And for what it's worth, I did check in with Ron Sanders, someone who is an expert in these affairs. He's a former OPM individual. He managed pay for performance work over there. He was on the Federal Salary Council. So based on his experience, he does say that this does seem to be a way for HHS to try to deal with grade inflation, and that this is a way to ensure that people who are doing exceptional work are the ones who are going to get the biggest payout as far as bonuses.
That's Federal News Network's Jory Heckman. Jory, thanks for the story, and we'll keep an eye on it.
Thanks, Terry.
You can find his full story at federalnewsnetwork.com. The Federal Drive with Terry Gerton is produced by Eric White and Michelle Sandiford. Our web editor is Stephanie Wright. In honor of Public Service Recognition Week and Military Appreciation Month, Federal News Network and Delta Dental invite you to recognize the people who make public service possible. Send them an e-card to say thank you at federalnewsnetwork.com. Search May We Say Thank You. For the latest updates, stay with federalnewsnetwork.com or follow us on Facebook, YouTube, and LinkedIn. I'm Terry Gerton. Thanks for listening.